So good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining the Prince George's County Historical Society for its September 29th, 2025 History Chat. I'm Donna Schneider, President of the Society. We do record the chat, so we would appreciate it if you would mute your microphone if you haven't already done so. You will be able to find the History Chat on our YouTube channel through our website, www.pghistory.org. We appreciate the support of our members and sponsors. For those of you who may not know, the Society receives no support other than through the generosity of members, sponsors, and donations. If you would like to help us keep things like tonight's chat free for all to enjoy, please consider becoming a member or making a donation, both of which can be done via our website. Also, we will have a Q&A at the end, so please put your questions in the chat box and we will answer as many of them as possible. Tonight, I will be chatting with Megan Searing Young, Director of the Greenbelt Museum, about the history of Greenbelt and the Greenbelt Museum. Megan has been the Director of the Greenbelt Museum since 2008. The museum is focused on the history of Greenbelt, Maryland, a New Deal era experimental community established in 1937. The Greenbelt Museum is comprised of a historic house, an exhibit gallery, and an archive. Along with tours of the house, the museum offers a free quarterly lecture series, walking tours through the community, special events, educational programs for children, and much more. In addition to overseeing the day-to-day operations of the museum, Ms. Young has curated numerous exhibitions, lectured on many aspects of Greenbelt history, and in 2012 co-authored Images of America Greenbelt. She earned a BA in Art History and Women's Studies from Johns Hopkins University and an MA in the History of Decorative Arts from the Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Institution and the Parsons School of Design program, where she focused on early 20th century design, material culture, and social history. Megan is a Prince George's County native, but she currently lives in Washington, D.C. with her husband and two daughters. So, good evening, Megan. Let's see if we can get this chat started.
Thank you for having me.
Sure. So tell us a little bit about the history of Greenbelt.
Sure. So the basics are it was a project that was part of President Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal. It was built primarily to be a relief project, so it put many people to work who needed work. It was also relieving a housing shortage that was happening in Washington, D.C., since that was one of the areas in the country where there were still some jobs to be had, and housing was very, very difficult to come by, particularly for people who were of low to moderate income. That's the sort of term that the planners used. The third reason was really it was really intended to be a model of modern town planning. Town planning was sort of a burgeoning field, and they really sort of had the planners, the people doing the hiring anyway, had access to some of the best and brightest of that sort of new field of town planning. So they were trying to envision a way to combine the best of both city and country living. They did use the word suburban, even though we think of that more in sort of a post-war context, but they did use that term. And the planners were very clear and thought that if you did not sort of look at the suburbs and try to plan them out in a way that made sense with these sort of Greenbelt communities encircling larger cities and towns, that the result would be suburban sprawl. And we all pretty much know how that ended up. So it was quite difficult to get in. There were about 5,000 applicants for the 888 homes. And they were looking for residents who were young, who were willing to live in this experimental community, and really who were willing to sort of push up their sleeves and, form all of the clubs and committees. And, they formed a newspaper and all the things that normally would have evolved in a regular community. There were no elder businessmen, there were no churches, there were no hospitals or doctors. So everything was really kind of brand new. The idea for it really came from Ebenezer Howard, who was a philosopher in the UK at the turn of the last century. He had sort of promoted the idea of a country, and part never really came to be as much as they would have wanted it to be the case. But so much of the rest of it did. One very important note that we are really focusing on quite a lot at the museum is that it ended up being built exclusively for white families. There were plans at the very beginning that there would be a section of the land that was purchased to become Greenbelt that would be set aside for Black families. That never happened. It was considered way too controversial. There was local opposition to it, as well as opposition from local lawmakers. So the impression that we have today is that the planners sort of understood that that was it was something that they had to. It was jettisoned very early on, and that if they had really pushed for that, the belief was probably that the whole project would have been stopped. So we're doing a lot of research in that area now. Looking at how long Greenbelt did remain a white-only community. Things that served to sort of I don't know how to phrase it exactly, but different forces that were at work that ended up being that way. So that's sort of like that's it in a nutshell. But I have lots more to say, but I'll stop if you have a different question.
No, well, I was just going to ask a question. You said that it was originally 880 homes, I believe.
Yes,
What,
888.
did it
Yeah.
expand to more homes, or is it still just
Yes,
the 880?
it did. So in wartime, they built 1,000 additional homes that were for defense workers. And those residents were not screened in quite the same way that the original residents were. They did have to be employed in the war effort. And unfortunately, that part of the project was a little more rushed. It was not built with the same care in terms of the plan. So instead of having courts in Greenbelt, the homes are flipped. So the orientation is that the backs of the home actually face the street and the front of the home actually faces garden space. They did that as part of a planning idea, which was to take a regular city block and blow that up into what they call a super block. And they took the sidewalks that would normally be around that block, and they put those sidewalks in the interior of the block, which formed a series of walkways and pathways through the community. So in the defense home area, that wasn't fully realized. They also didn't do all the landscaping things. So at the beginning, it was called Mud Belt, which is kind of unfortunate. But and it eventually did become incorporated with the rest of the community, but not without some stress on the part of the original residents, because they realized the population was doubling, and they were worried about services like, whether the grocery store would be adequate, whether the school would be adequate, things like that. We do know that in wartime, there were so many school students that they actually ran them in shifts throughout the day in order to get everybody time at school.
Oh. What was the original, based on today's roads around it, sort of what was the original area of the 880 homes?
Sure. So that original area was really right. There were the two main roads, Crescent Road and Ridge Road, and all of the homes were sort of clustered around those two. So there was lots more land that was purchased, again, to become that green space, but the primary residences were sort of right there in the center of town. And that idea somewhat came from a sociologist that was involved in the project. His name is Clarence Perry, and he had the idea of a neighborhood unit, which was, in his mind, housing, school, shopping center, and recreational spaces all kind of close together in a nucleus, so that everybody had access to all of those things really by walking. They did, have cars in mind to some extent. And by 1939, about 67% of the residents did own cars. But up until that time, they did have banks of garages that they built, and some of the homes had garages attached, but only the duplex, only ones that were the courts were 2 houses, 4 houses, 6 and 8, and only the homes with 2 houses really had garages on their sides. But it wasn't necessarily your garage to use if you were assigned that house but didn't own a car. It would be assigned to someone else.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was going to say, was there any nearby public transportation or something they can
that,
use?
that was a huge problem, a huge worry for residents. It really was quite rural at that time, as you all know. Being Prince George's County historians, there was not a lot out there in terms of infrastructure. So Greenbelters decided that they would hire a bus service that came into town and would take you to the streetcar line that would then take you into DC. Now, if you missed that bus, you were in trouble. So they also started carpooling very early on. So the newspaper, which was begun in the very first, like within a month or two, its first issue was in November 37. The first residents moved in the last few days of September and early October of 37. And that paper, which was the Cooperator, now the News Review, has never missed an issue. It's been published weekly since then. So there were lots and lots of jokes about carpooling and cartoons and, things like that. But in general, that was the way that folks got, back and forth into DC. Many of them were employed further out as well. Of course, University of Maryland was right there. Eventually Goddard would be there, and Agricultural Research Center was there. So some people didn't have too far to go, but the majority did take that streetcar line in.
I'm assuming most people had federal jobs, or a lot of the people had
Many
federal
of them
jobs.
did. Many of them did. There were some who were employed, in the community. So the dentist, for instance, which is still there, the McCarls, there were other businesses that were active there, but many of the people were federal workers. And actually, they advertised the project by building these small scale models that they displayed in office buildings. And some of the materials advertising Greenbelt were also available in some of those office buildings. So they clearly were, we get a lot of questions about, well, was it for homeless? Was it for people who, were desperately trying to find a place to live? And the answer is no. They really were aiming to have the residents be folks who had some education, and you had to be employed. Now, you couldn't make more than a certain amount or below a certain amount. I think the max at that point was, it was 2,200 a year. And there are stories of people giving up promotions in order to stay. Male heads of household who gave up promotions to be able. The quality of life was such that people didn't want to leave once they got there. So
That's nice.
yeah.
So you mentioned the dentist, the family was one of
Yes.
the original families. Are
Yes.
there any original families other than them still around?
There are quite a few. The earliest families called themselves pioneers, and they meant that in the context of pioneers in a new way of living. So there are quite a few pioneer families still around. I can think of a couple, and sometimes it'll be the grandparents that were there. Their children might have moved away, but sometimes they've come back, or their grandchildren have come back. So that's a very common story as well. And there are also lots of examples of families who began living in the smaller homes that are now owned by Greenbelt Homes Incorporated, which is a large housing cooperative. The government sold it in 1952. It was originally veterans who organized to buy it, and then it was Greenbelt Veterans Homeowners Corporation. I think it was GVHC. I'm blanking on those initials, but so some of the families started out in the smaller units and then would move to some of the larger homes that were built as part of the infill development that came in after the government sold. So there's neighborhoods like Woodland Hills or Lakeside, and then Boxwood Village is a big one that came in 67. And so people would sort of move around based on the needs of their family. Now, if you were assigned in the early days into one of the government-built homes, and excuse me, you were mother, father, one child. If you had another child, you were expected to go to the management office and request a larger unit, and they would move you into one if one was available or became available. So there was a fair amount of government involvement, in your sort of daily living, and it was Greenbelt was the target of a great deal of ridicule in the local newspapers. They called it Tugwell Town, and he was sometimes referred to as Rex the Red. Rexford Tugwell was the head of the Resettlement Administration, and it was really his sort of idea to experiment with this kind of community. And so it was a bit, people were a little bit living in a fishbowl. There are lots of tales of people coming out to sightsee. And there's one famous story of one of the residents overhearing someone in a convertible driving by, and the people were talking about the town and said, they're really just like us, like I don't know what they were expecting, but they were sort of skeptical, I think, that this would work. And of course it has. It's been a thriving community for, let's see, we're way past the 75th now. I think we're past the 80th point. So
Or
I can't,
almost at the 90th.
we're almost at the 90th.
Yeah, another 2 years.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Soon we'll have to start planning our 100th anniversary. So I don't know that I'll be there for that, but you never know. So
Okay. Sorry, I did have a question that went out of my head, but now, so
sure.
I'll go to one of my pre-planned questions.
Sure.
Can you talk about some of the historic structures that are in Greenbelt?
Yes, of course. One second. Let me just take a sip of water. I'm getting over a cold and my voice tends to go at this time of night. So there's many of the original structures that are still, in fact, nearly all of them, except for with a few exceptions. There's one court that did have to be torn down because a sinkhole formed. But other than that, the historic fabric of the community, as we would talk about in preservation terms, is largely intact. So, as I said, almost all the original housing. There are several apartment buildings that are still there. They're kind of striking. They look very modernist. They have expanses of glass block. They're right by the doorways. The most significant building, probably that is still a part of the community, is what's now the Greenbelt Community Center, but was the center. It was called Center School, and it was always intended to be a school and a community building. So when you look at early plans of it, or early renderings of it, it will say Greenbelt Center School Community Building. So there always was the intention that this would be a place for adults to use in the evenings to hold meetings and things like that. That building was almost torn down. In the early 90s, the school board, which had been maintaining the building, decided it was really in need of too much repair. So they were going to rebuild on that site. It was very controversial. Many Greenbelters came out to support it being repurposed as a community center. It went to a referendum and kind of squeaked by. Yes.
Can I just interrupt? My computer is making the timer symbol again.
Oh,
so
no.
If I disappear, people, that's
okay.
Now you know why. All right, sorry, continue.
We'll rejoin and continue. We'll
Yes.
persevere, right? So they it squeaked by in the referendum. They did repurpose it into a community center, and it really is thriving now. I mean, there's so many things housed there. There's the newspaper is there. There's a senior lunch program, dance studios, the Greenbelt Museum office, pottery studios, a large exhibition gallery, our smaller exhibition gallery. It's really, there's always something going on in there. You can do Scottish country dancing. You can do the band practices there, just all kinds of things. And it's scary to think what might have happened, if it had been torn down. Significantly, it also is where there's wonderful public art that was created by Lenore Thomas Strauss. She was brought on as a young artist. She was in her mid to late 20s when she was given the commission, and she carved the preamble to the Constitution in bas-reliefs on the front of the building. She also did the very large mother and child statue that's still in the center of town. That was a fountain drink. A fountain, a place where people could get a drink. So we don't know if those would have been saved. So it's really the Art Deco Society of Washington, an organization I've been formally involved with, and many other preservation groups got involved to save it. So it's a real win as far as a successful repurposing. So the downtown is also largely intact. The Greenbelt Theater, now renamed as the Greenbelt Cinema, is a wonderful place to see a film. It's one of the few remaining large screen theaters in the area, a single screen theater, and it's expanded to the storefront next door. There's also the original Greenbelt Cooperative. Cooperatives were a big part of Greenbelt as it was first becoming a community. And let me think what else is some of the other significant. There's a Greenbelt Community Church that was built in 1950. And many of the buildings are typical of the era of the late 30s. Greenbelt's architecture partially took its cues from much of the rebuilding that was happening in Europe following World War I. So many of the housing projects that were built there are very modernist in their look and feel. So lots of geometric shapes. Certainly, you could refer to it as Art Deco or the International style. Greenbelters themselves refer to it as functionalist, which I love. They were like nothing overly fancy here. We are, we live in our functionalist architecture. Their homes were considered that. There were just lots of features of the community that I think marked it as, a new sort of modern take on how to create community and eventually how to sustain it. So there's a lot to be learned there now, a lot that remains relevant, I think, to conversations we have now, particularly about affordable housing.
Yeah. So anything else you want to share about the town of Greenbelt before we talk about the museum?
Yeah. So, we this sort of segues into the museum, but at the museum we get many, many visitors who are, of course, we have lots of residents who come and bring family and friends to visit, but many times we get visitors who say they're shopping for a new community, which is so interesting to us. They're not just looking for a home, a house with four walls. They're looking for, a place that offers more. And I think sometimes they'll say they're comparing Greenbelt to, Hyattsville or Silver Spring or Tacoma Park. Um, and they often want to know, what it's like to live in Greenbelt. And I wish we could go back and talk to some of the planners about this, but I suspect they would say, that the quality of life is so good because it was so carefully planned out. They took great care in situating the homes on the landscape in such a way that it would catch cross breezes. They did not clear cut or level entirely. They did clear some areas and level some areas, but it still has the sort of differentiating landscape that sort of leads down into where the lake was created. That was the first thing that they actually worked on when they brought relief workers out. So there's a lot. It is a walkable community. I probably sound like I'm being very promotional about it, which I don't necessarily mean to. It does have its flaws, but it's there's just a lot. It's a rich place to study. We also get many, many visitors who are coming from other countries. We get landscape planners, landscape architects. We have people coming from China, from Australia, from the UK. Some of that has died down post-pandemic, but we hope it will continue to come back online again.
Okay. So talk about your museum.
Yeah, so the museum
and why it exists.
Yeah. So the museum was founded on the occasion of Greenbelt's 50th anniversary. It was really the idea of a group of volunteers who felt that the history was important enough that it needed to be preserved and shared. And so those volunteers convinced the city to purchase one of the original townhomes, and that is where the museum is housed today. It is only 836 square feet. So we have office space in the community center, and we are in the process of expanding. It's a duplex, and we are in the process of expanding the museum to incorporate the duplex next door. We have a capital campaign going on right now to make that a education and visitor center, which will house an archive. It'll be space for exhibits. It will have space for hands-on learning. And really, it will be sort of a first stop for people who want to explore Greenbelt and really the larger history of the county. We hope to have lots of information about other sites to see within the county.
Yeah, and steal our thunder. That's what our library.
I know, right? Well, we hope to have lots. I mean, we have lots of people who we send to you all the time. We say if you're looking for doing research about the area, particularly the county, that you've got to go to the Prince George's Historical Society. So we also send people to the Tugwell Room, which is also housed in the library. But we, it is interesting. The two other communities that were built, there were 3 Greentowns built, one in Greendale, Wisconsin, and the other in Green Hills, Ohio. And both of those places now, I think, both have buildings that they use to help interpret the history. But Green Hills, one of them has only just gotten one of the original homes. So there is no substitute for bringing people into one of the original homes so that they can sort of get a feel for the space and, understand how much these homes were trying to reimagine, um, life outside of crowded inner city dwellings. It really was a reform project in a way. They wanted to um, make sure families were living in the right sized homes. There's lots of windows, no dark corners, no unhealthful spaces. So, those are all, again, I think things that are very relevant to the conversations we have today about affordable housing. And we do walking tours, we do a quarterly lecture series, we have changing exhibits. We also speak to lots of community groups, just like this one. I'm so grateful to be invited because we really don't have a marketing budget. So we really do rely on social media and our website. And certainly the city, the museum is a project that is owned by the city of Greenbelt and operated by the city, but gets a lot of support from the Friends of the Greenbelt Museum, which is the group that founded the museum originally and is still a functioning nonprofit that helps to supplement the resources that the city gives. So, and I'm a one-woman show. I'm the only full-time employee. We have one part-time person, and then we rely, much like you all do, on the help of volunteers. They're really essential to the operation. So we want everyone to come visit. We're about to install our Halloween display, which we sort of, when I first started, it was our task was interpreting 1937 to 52. We've expanded that really in both directions. So right now we're working with a cemetery consulting group to develop a master plan for the cemeteries. You may have heard about that. That dovetails a lot, of course, with Prince George's County history. But we also, so for some of our special events, like the Halloween one, I fill the house with vintage Halloween decorations. Some of them are called blow molds. They're plastic light up decorations, and it sort of glows at night. So, we have fun with it. So we like to think of ourselves as a fun place to visit. We do allow lots of hands-on activities. We really want to get those kids interested so that they'll come back and be museum and historic site visitors as they grow up. So that's
Start 'em young, yes.
yeah, that's really, our reason for being in a lot of ways is to really celebrate and share the history. Because unlike so many historic houses where the history is, focused on the landowner or the family that built it and the wealthy, the powerful people, although we're seeing much more sites really doing a great job of exploring not just the landowners, but everyone who worked at the sites, those who were enslaved there. I mean, these histories are so important and have been overlooked for too long. So we celebrate the average man and woman who were, struggling through the Great Depression. And it's important to tell those stories as well.
So do you have anything special or unique in your collections for the museum?
Oh, yes. Well, we have some really wonderful things in the collection. Yes and no, I should say, because another thing that I think is special about us is, we allow people to sit on the couch, for instance, in the museum house. And I always say, George Washington didn't sleep here. This is it's not a rare, New England highboy. It's not a piece of furniture that shouldn't be touched. It's very accessible history, and so we have things like fiesta wear, and we have some vintage clothing. We have viewmasters in the upstairs kids' bedroom, which both the adults and kids enjoy. So we have lots of everyday objects, but we do have some very special things. One of which is a wood carving that was done by Lenore Thomas Strauss that she gave to the second Mrs. Tugwell, who in turn gave it to the museum when the museum opened. So some of things like that are really irreplaceable. We also have lots of people's papers and photographs that we treasure. They really help tell the story of Greenbelt. We have many, many oral histories in the collection. One more interesting thing that we have is a pair of shorts. So when Greenbelt was first occupied, there were a lot of rules. It was somewhat famous for its rules. You couldn't hang laundry on the lines after 4 p.m. and no laundry on your lines outside your house on Sunday at all. So most people were fine with that, and they understood they were, making it a nice place to live. And there were so many ambassadors and government visitors coming out that, the intent was to keep it where, there's a place for everything. There are even trash closets where you store your trash cans, that they'll come in and pick up the trash from. So there was another rule that said that women could not wear shorts in the center of town. And, by the early 50s, this was a little bit antiquated. And so I think they would write citations. But anyway, there's one young woman who marched to town and, sort of made a stand and said, this is ridiculous. And I should be allowed to wear shorts here. And I think it went to city council and they did overturn that particular rule. So we have the shorts that were worn into the center of town. So really some neat things like that that are great objects for storytelling. We have a big radio in the house, and that allows us to talk about FDR and his fireside chats. And, we really want it to be a sensory experience. People come in. So we do have the radio going with, big band music sometimes. And, as I said, we try to make it so there's lots of things people can pick up and touch.
So speaking of FDR, did he ever come visit Greenbelt?
He did several times. Yes. He was there at least twice that we know of, although Eleanor came more frequently. FDR's first visit was Tugwell. The story goes he brought him out in a convertible and they toured the site, and Tugwell had his ear. He was part of the Brain Trust. He really had convinced FDR that these communities needed to be built. And in a sort of in the best sort of framing of it is an example, I think, of what the government can do to help people who are struggling during an economic disaster, like the Great Depression, when there's a will to do that, when there's agreement that something like this should be built. And of course, it was under the umbrella of the New Deal, so there were so many experimental programs happening then. But he did come out and visit, and then he came back once many of the homes were built. And there's actually newsreel footage of him standing in front of one of the homes, and you can see his two, bodyguards standing right next to him. Now we know, helping him to, stand up. But it's, it's just a good example, I think, of how important these projects were. It was a good photo op for him to be there. And Eleanor came, I believe it's 3 times. There may be a 4th time. She came when it was being constructed, and then she came back for she did a surprise visit actually in 1937, I believe, or maybe 38, but showed up in the school. And we have oral histories of people saying that they remember her coming to visit. She was very interested in the community, and she came back for a war bond rally to help with the war effort. Of course, Greenbelt was, like every other community, was very involved in the war effort. So I just gave a talk last Thursday about Greenbelt's Victory Gardens. So, it was important for her to be there for that war bond rally as they were trying to help that with that war effort. So Eleanor Roosevelt's probably, I hesitate to say more beloved than FDR in Greenbelt, but she's very, very beloved. In fact, I was giving a tour to school kids. I think they were like elementary, maybe junior high. And we had a portrait of Roosevelt above the radio so that, we could talk about the fireside chats. And we pointed to the portrait and said, "So who's that?" And a couple of them said, "That's Eleanor's husband," which I really do love. So, and of course the school, the big public school that has a magnet program, was going to be named after Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And the community fought that and insisted it should be named Eleanor Roosevelt. And that's why it's named Eleanor Roosevelt today. So,
my alma mater. I didn't know that.
Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, I went there. Yeah.
My brother did as well. I did not, because science and tech was not my forte, and where we were,
not mine either.
Yeah, where we were in the county, I would have been bussed over there, so I did not go. But it's yeah, she's that there's been lots and lots of um, praise for Eleanor Roosevelt over the years, and you know, she also was involved in making sure that it was built to specification. By the end, it was wildly over budget. The press was still brutal about it. Some of the New Deal programs were falling out of favor. Tugwell himself left before the completion of the community. He resigned in 1936. And eventually, I think within a handful of years, he became a bit of a lightning rod for Roosevelt. And eventually he was sent all the way out to Puerto Rico to be the governor there. So there was a lot of distancing, as some of these New Deal programs became more controversial. But Eleanor, interceded. They were going to bring in the Army Corps of Engineer and just sort of try to finish it quickly. And one of the administrators wrote to her and said, "Is there, I know this community is important to you. Is there anything you can do?" She wrote a note to FDR. We have copies of little notes that they wrote to each other on the letter. And he said, "Go out and see what if this is true, and see what you can do." And she stepped in, and that is partly why there are the ball fields and the recreational spaces that are there. So she's extra special to Greenbelt residents.
I can understand that.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. One question I meant to ask you when we were talking about Greenbelt, when did it become, I guess, integrated, for lack of a better word?
That, yeah, I should talk about that. So the best that we know is there was a committee for fair housing active in the early 60s. I think their first meeting was in 63. And that was an interesting group. Many of them were progressive. They really wanted to see Greenbelt become an integrated community. And so they formed this committee and started meeting. But there were also people who were joining that group, honestly, because they were worried that their housing value would fall if the community became integrated. So the origins are very interesting of it. We did track down the first family that moved into what is Greenbelt Homes Incorporated, and they moved in 66. There's an interview with her name is Angie Williams. She and her husband River moved in with their two sons. Maybe they only had one son at the time, I can't remember. But they were kind of recruited to move in. They were in touch with this committee. They'd been having a very difficult time. They were both employed in federal jobs, and they were looking for a place to raise their family, and they were having a hard time. She has many stories of the discrimination that they faced trying to buy a home in many of the sort of other communities in and around Greenbelt that had grown up. So they moved in, and then the next thing that happened was the council, I believe, asked the apartment owners to, I can't remember how it's phrased, but they insisted that they not use discriminatory practices in allowing tenants to move in. So other parts of Greenbelt, like Boxwood Village, was built. It opened in 67, and we believe that that was an area that there were earlier families, Black families who moved in there as well. We have some of the names. We're trying to track them down. In addition to my duties at the museum, I was asked to be the staff liaison to Greenbelt's Reparations Commission. That was formed as a result of a referendum that residents voted on. And that commission is doing a lot of research, a lot of work, both on Greenbelt's prehistory, so history of the land and who was enslaved by families who lived on the land that would become Greenbelt, and also, going right up through into when Greenbelt became more integrated and right up to the present, to look at disparities and things like that. And, despite the fact that Greenbelt has been integrated, the center of town, one thing that the Reparations Commission has found is that the center of town still skews white. And that begs the question, why is that? What are the forces at work there? So it's a fascinating story. We have a lot about it on our website, and I'm looking forward to the Reparations Commission has done a lot of research with my assistance, but also with the assistance of others. I think I saw Alan Verda on the call. He's done a tremendous amount of research. I know about some of the enslaved people who were living in Greenbelt on the land that became Greenbelt. And reparations is actually looking even further back to pre-European contact and the indigenous populations that were living on this land. That's part of the charge as well. So it's a fascinating story. There's so much more we need to uncover, and it's ongoing. You know, reparations is a process, not something you cross off a list. So we are hoping, actually, we're hoping to have Alan Verda come and speak as part of the museum lecture series, maybe next month. And we've done quite a few lectures and programs that have to do with this topic. We did one called Mapping Racism that talked about discrimination and integration within the county, several others that we've done. So it's just extremely important that we be sure that we're talking about that history. You know, we often hear people talking about Greenbelt as this utopian, utopian town, and you can't talk about that without also making sure that people understood that it might have been utopia, but only for the white families who were originally, accepted into the community. It would be many decades until it was open to all.
Before I ask my last question,
Sure.
I'm going to make comment to our audience to please put any questions you have in the chat, and then we'll ask those of Megan before we end tonight. So, do you have any upcoming events you would like to share with the audience?
Yes, we do have, as I said, this next lecture. Look on our website for that. We have scrolling images usually that are the most up to date about what's going on. We also have in November, the museum's co-sponsoring the Sankofa Mobile Museum. That's part of Maryland National Capital Park and Planning. That's going to be in Greenbelt. I believe it's the first weekend in November. We need to start getting press out about that. And then we also, as I said, we'll have our Halloween display. We'll have that throughout October. And then in December, we set up at, there's a big event in Greenbelt called it was called Festival of Lights. Now it's called Sparkle Mart. And it's a juried art and craft show. And the museum is permitted to have tables there where we sell our books, and we sell greeting cards and other gifts, and all of that proceeds from that go to support the Friends of the Greenbelt Museum and the work that they do. So that is always the first weekend of December, and we encourage everybody to come out and see us. The first Friday of December is when we have an evening open house. We can't do candlelight tours because we're past the era of a candlelight holiday tour, but we do have an evening open house where we have our Christmas tree with vintage ornaments, and we have a vintage menorah, and we have a lot of fun on that evening. So, and it's free to come. Admission normally is on Sundays 1 to 5. It's $5 a person, and that includes a short film and about a 30-minute to 40-minute tour of the house, depending on how many questions people have. So we also do. We should have some fall walking tours coming up as well. So we invite everybody to, if you hop on our website, you can join our newsletter. It's free. It's an email, and we only do about once a month because that's the most that I can manage to put out. So there will be no spam. We will not be one of these organizations that sends you lots of email. I'm lucky if I get one out a month. So
I was gonna say you're better than me. I'm lucky to get one out a quarter. So
quarterly, yeah. There's been times when I've done it quarterly. Yeah. You just you wanna keep current, but it's a lot, to get. I know how much work goes into planning programs like this. So, and I just really want to thank you again. I'm so appreciative of opportunities where we get to speak, and also particularly, I think it's nice to have informal gatherings where. It's just a different form of event. And I think there's really a need for informal conversations about history and historic sites. It's just they're not as plentiful as I wish they were. So I'm grateful. We've talked about doing something like this at the museum and having, a more open sort of conversation rather than a sort of, formal lecture. Even though I did have beautiful slides to show you, you can catch another presentation when I'll show those, since I couldn't get my laptop to charge. So, and I'm on an iPad. So I was stymied by the technology. I even
We
Googled
both
it.
work tonight.
I know. Sometimes it just doesn't work out. So I have all the stuff in my head anyway. So I'm always so grateful to be able to share it.
Well, as I said when we met a couple months ago now,
Yeah.
it's something that I've been wanting to grab you to come do this anyway.
Yes.
So I'm glad we finally were able to sync schedules and do this.
Yes. It's wonderful.
So yeah, and I was gonna say these informal chats have been very good for the Historical Society. I
Yeah.
mean, we've gotten a lot of interaction with both our members and the public. It's amazing how many people view our YouTube channel afterwards to look at some of these
I know.
chats, and that's great. I'm so happy that it works.
Yep, we have that happen as well. It's and what's nice about these Zoom ones is you just hit record and it's ready to go. So in terms of creation of programming, I love it. We do about half and half now, in person and Zoom programs, but it's great because it really has legs, as they say. It can reach such a wider audience when it can be on YouTube and people can watch it on their own time. It's just a great way to share history, I think. So, so yes.
Well, thank you again, Megan. There's no chat, no Q&A
no
at
questions
the moment.
at all?
But if somebody wants to unmute their microphone and ask a question, I'll give you a few seconds to do that if anybody wants to.
No questions.
Okay. At the moment, I don't hear anybody. So I just wanted to thank everybody for joining us tonight. Our next chat and our last chat of 2025 will be Monday, October 27th. At 7 p.m. on Zoom as normal, hopefully without technical difficulties that evening. Next year, with the celebration of the country's 250th birthday, look for some more lectures from the Society in addition to our history chats. And I hope everyone can join us for all of them. And if you would like, yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't want to interrupt you. This is Tom Peter. For the October chat, I will be talking about red lines and black codes in Prince George's County and Maryland with Tanya Sweat. I haven't a title for this yet, but we're going to talk about segregation, integration, reparations, all the shuns. And it'll be a wide-ranging conversation.
Terrific.
Thank you. And
hello, Donna. Hi, this is Damon, also the director. I did have a question. I can ask it after you're finished.
No, go ahead.
So my question would be: I know we have record of when the first maybe non-white or certainly black family was in the Greenbelt, but how about the first black business that was when did that occur in Greenbelt? Is there any record of that?
That is a great question, and I don't know the answer to that. I am ashamed to say. I wish I did. It's something that the Reparations Commission has asked as well, and as of now, I don't know if they have the answer. But and I've been trying to think. I have some suspicions of ones that might have been early, but I just don't know. And it's something that is so important. So I do hope that we get that answer. One thing, this is sort of related in a way, sort of tangentially, but over the years that I've been here, this is my 17th year, I think. I've often been looking to Lakeland, which is, of course, the community in College Park, a traditionally African-American community that is going through their own process of, they're not using reparations, but they're using another term with the city of College Park. But I often wonder if there were business owners there who it's so close by, and it was another sort of thriving community right here out near Greenbelt. I've often wondered if there weren't businesses that maybe cater to people in Greenbelt. I have found through speaking with people who grew up here, there are a few accounts of women who helped Greenbelt families in a domestic frame. They would help with cleaning or cooking, but we just don't know yet who was the first business. And as I said, it's incredibly important. So I hope to have an answer for you. I hope the Reparations Commission is able to find that. It's a question we've been asking all the folks that we know that have been in Greenbelt for there's some very, very long-term citizens. We're facing that problem, though, that a lot of the people that were that have memories were children, and they just don't. If they grew up in Greenbelt, they don't necessarily have the same kinds of memories that the adults would have had. So I hope that I hope I'm able to share more information as we have it. So keep an eye on, certainly in the Greenbelt News Review, that's probably a place where there might be an article. And I don't know, as I said, I know Alan Verda's on the call. I know he's done a tremendous amount of research in Greenbelt. I don't know if he has any insight into that question, but if he does, chime in.
I was going to say, Alan, I saw you had unmuted yourself. So did you want to ask a question or make a comment? I guess not. Okay. Does anybody else have any questions or comments?
Donna,
no, he's unmuted. There you go. Go ahead.
No, I figured out how to do it. No, I don't have any insight on the businesses at all. I did want to add that in addition to the cemeteries, there is a remnant of pre-Greenbelt in the American Legion Hall, which has been expanded over the years, but someplace in there's a 19th century farmhouse that predated the building of Greenbelt. And I once wrote with the daughter of Sherrod East, who was an early Greenbelt resident. They lived for a while in the Amos Reed Mansion, which was where Beltway Plaza was. She said when they moved, before Beltway Plaza was built, they took the staircase or the banister or something like that with them to their new house in Bowie.
Wow.
And I can't, I'd have to go through my files and see if I can find the
I've never heard that. That's fascinating.
Yeah. It probably would not have been a staircase because most Bowie homes are one story, aren't they?
Yeah, they are, aren't they?
So it was some sort of architectural feature that they took from the Amos Reed Mansion before Beltway Plaza was built and the mansion.
That's wild. There is Toping Castle also, where the remnant of there's one little corner of a foundation that now is right at the edge of where the Royal Farms is. It's sort of enclosed in a fence, and we are there's plans to put a wayside panel there to talk about that. But yeah, there are a few little bits of prehistory, Greenbelt's prehistory, I should say, around. And there's also Indian Springs, which is a site where there's a cemetery behind. It's behind one of the office buildings behind the TGI Fridays, but that's another site that hopefully this master plan will help us figure out how to preserve better. So, yes.
Donna, I want to step back in now in my role as chair of the Preservation Commission since I've got Alan's attention. Greenbelt is not a county historic district, and I'm not sure whether there are county historic sites. Toping Castle is on my radar because I'm been addressing the developer on issues there. But somehow Greenbelt seems to have escaped historic preservation from the subtitle. And Alan, do you have information on how that happened?
Well, I recall that all of Greenbelt was once not, or all of Central Greenbelt was nominated for the National Register as a district, but there was so much controversy raised over whether people would be able to make additions and things like that, that got shelved. That's a vague recollection. And maybe Megan can correct me on
Yeah,
that.
no, that's correct. Greenbelt is considered, it's in the Historic Register as a National Historic Landmark, but it's the plan really that is considered the landmark. So it's not really specific buildings, if that makes sense. So the Greenbelt Homes Incorporated has its own set of rules about what it will allow and not allow in terms of expansion of the houses. They're quite strict. And from a preservation standpoint, that's a good thing. But when we give tours to people who are preservationists, they say, how could you let them put, aluminum siding on these houses? And we don't have any authority to stop that, but also it's a living, breathing community. So people do want to make changes to their homes, but they also don't want too many rules and regulations. So it has been proposed that it be an historic district that would go along with those more strict sort of rules and regulations. But that's exactly right. There's been a public outcry. People didn't want it. They thought that the rules that are in place from the housing co-op are enough. But Greenbelt is included in the NCOZ, which I'm not sure I can remember it's the Neighborhood Conservation Overlay Zone, and that was passed a couple of years ago, and that's the goal of that sort of zoning rule was also to kind of control people from like bumping up and bumping out some of these homes in smaller neighborhoods. That's not just Greenbelt, but in other places. I want to say it might be Mount Rainier. I can't remember exactly the other places, but there are other places involved in that. So it's a bit complex. Now the theater, I think because several buildings have gotten grants from the Maryland Historical Trust, and those go along with certain restrictions and liens so that you can't alter, the facades. The same with the community center, I believe. But it's a bit of a controversial topic, for sure.
Well, to the extent, Megan, that you wanted the chair of the Historic Preservation Commission to come in and talk about county historic districts, which include local area committees.
Yes.
Preservation is pushed down to the local level. I'd be delighted to come.
That's great. Yeah. It's an issue that has come up many times. We've tried to do a little bit to educate people about the fact that if you are living in a GHI home, you are a steward of an historic property, whether it has, an official designation or not. So, but I am not, as a city employee, I'm not supposed to have an actual opinion about it. So it's on the down low.
Okay. Seeing no other questions or microphones unmuted, I'm going to say thank you, Megan. Greatly enjoyed the chat, and I actually learned a few things while you were chatting that I didn't know. So again, thank you everybody for joining us tonight, and hope you can join us in October.
Are these for members only?
No.
These talks, they're open to the public? Okay.
Yeah, no, I put them out on Facebook, so they're open
good.
to the public as well as send it to our members.
Terrific. Okay, I know there'll be a lot of interest in the October talk, so okay. I will help get the word out about that if that's okay.
Sure, I'll send you the info when I post it. All right, great.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Good night, everyone.
Bye.